What would you do if your only son, the boy you raised through hardship, the boy you gave your best years to, suddenly called you one cold December morning and said, "Dad, don't come for Christmas"? 67 years. That's how long Gerald Whitaker had lived, and not once in those years had he missed a Christmas with his family. To him, the holiday wasn't just a date on the calendar, it was his lifeline. It was the one season that reminded him he wasn't completely alone in the world. But this year, that one phone call changed everything. You see, Gerald wasn't just any old man. He was a widower. His wife, Patricia, had been gone for nearly 20 years. A sudden heart attack had taken her, leaving Gerald to raise their only son, Daniel, all by himself. And if you've ever lost someone you love, you know the silence that follows. The empty seat at the table, the cold side of the bed. For Gerald, Christmas was the one time that silence didn't feel so heavy. He'd sit at Daniel's house, watching the grandkids tear open wrapping paper, smelling the roasted turkey Melissa cooked, hearing carols play softly in the background. In those moments, the loneliness lifted. But this year, that warmth was ripped away. Have you ever felt that sting of being pushed aside by the very people you sacrificed everything for? If you know that feeling, then Gerald's pain will hit you even harder. And if you want more stories like this that dig into real betrayal and revenge, make sure you hit subscribe right now and tell me where you are watching from, because what happens next will shock you. Family is all you've got during the holidays, or so Gerald thought. It happened while Gerald was standing on a ladder trying to hang the same set of Christmas lights he'd been using for over a decade. The lights were stubborn, half of them flickering, but Gerald admired that. They reminded him of himself, worn out, but still shining. The phone rang. He answered with a smile, already imagining Daniel's voice inviting him over early to help set up the tree. But instead, Daniel's voice was stiff, cold, almost rehearsed. "Dad," Daniel said, "about Christmas this year, I think it's better if you don't come." Gerald froze on the ladder, his gloved hand gripping the icy window ledge. He thought maybe he misheard. Maybe static had warped the words. "Don't come?" Gerald asked slowly. "Danny, what do you mean?" Daniel sighed, his voice clipped, like he just wanted to get it over with. "You heard me. Melissa and I just think it'll be less stressful this way. The kids are busy, the house is full, it's not a good time." Not a good time. Gerald's chest tightened. After everything he had given, his son was telling him Christmas was not a good time? He pressed, desperate to understand. "Danny, I've never missed a Christmas with you since you were born. Not one. What's going on?" But Daniel dodged the question. Gerald could hear a woman's voice in the background, faint but sharp. Melissa. And then Daniel ended the call, just like that. And Gerald was left staring at the frost on his window, realizing that for the first time in his life, he had been uninvited from Christmas. That evening, Gerald sat in his dim house, nursing a glass of whiskey he didn't even like. Across the street, he saw neighbors decorating their tree, laughter spilling through frosted windows. Families everywhere, except him. And then he noticed something odd. Out by the trash bins, a single envelope stuck out, its corner fluttering in the wind. The return address caught Gerald's eye. First National Bank of Chicago. He pulled on his boots, stepped into the snow, and fished it out. The envelope was damp, but legible. Inside were words that cut deeper than his son's rejection. Final notice, mortgage delinquency, immediate action required to avoid foreclosure. Gerald's hands trembled. His son's house, the house he had helped Daniel buy years ago, working overtime shifts just to scrape together the down payment, was on the brink of collapse. Why would Daniel throw away something this important? Why would he hide it? Had Melissa been keeping it from him? Or was Daniel himself too ashamed to face the truth? Gerald set the whiskey down. Suddenly, the ache in his chest was replaced with something sharper: suspicion. Gerald thought the worst part was being uninvited from Christmas, but now, with this letter in his hands, he's realizing the rejection was only the surface of something much darker. Before I tell you how Gerald reacts, give this video a like. It lets me know you want more stories with twists you'll never see coming. As the snow fell heavier outside, Gerald whispered to himself, "This isn't just about Christmas. Something's wrong, and I'm going to find out what." What he didn't know was that the rejection from Christmas was only the beginning, and the truth about Daniel's life was uglier than he imagined. The drive back from Chicago that night felt endless. Snow clung to the windshield, the wipers squealing with every pass. Gerald's mind wasn't on the road, though. It was drifting back, pulling him into memories he thought he had buried. When Daniel was 10 years old, Patricia had already been gone for 2 winters. Gerald remembered that Christmas vividly. Money had been tight, tighter than anyone around him ever knew. He had been pulling 12-hour shifts at the Caterpillar plant, grinding his body down just to keep the lights on. That December, Daniel wanted a baseball glove. It wasn't just any glove. It was the Wilson A2000, the kind the pros used. Gerald remembered staring at the price tag in the Sears catalog, his stomach twisting. The glove cost nearly a week's pay he didn't have to spare. But when Christmas morning came, Daniel tore through the wrapping paper and held that glove high above his head. The boy's eyes sparkled with a joy Gerald never forgot. That single smile had been worth every overtime shift, every aching joint, every penny. And now, 27 years later, that same boy was shutting the door on him. Have you ever given everything to someone only to feel like they erased your sacrifices? If you've ever felt that sting, you'll understand Gerald's pain. And if you want to hear how he turns that pain into power, make sure you stay with me until the end of this story. Gerald sat in his dim living room, staring at that old photo on the mantel. Daniel in his pajamas, grinning ear to ear, the glove clutched in both hands. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I gave you everything. So why am I being cut out now?" The sting was sharper because it wasn't just about Christmas. It was about loyalty, about a lifetime of sacrifices suddenly erased by one cold phone call. The more Gerald thought about it, the more his focus shifted away from Daniel. His son had always been soft-hearted, sometimes weak, but never cruel. He was the type who apologized even when he wasn't wrong, the type who avoided conflict at all costs. Melissa, though, Melissa was different. She carried herself like everything needed to be polished, like every word was rehearsed. She wasn't rude to Gerald, but she wasn't warm either. Patricia had once said she was the kind of woman who likes to polish the silver while hiding the rust. Now watching the pieces click together, Gerald couldn't ignore it. Melissa was the one pulling the strings. Melissa's plan was crystal clear: cut Gerald out for good. But do you think Gerald would let her win that easily? Before I reveal how he flipped the tables, don't forget to subscribe. These stories are more than drama. They're life lessons about betrayal, loyalty, and revenge you won't forget. 2 nights later, Gerald drove quietly to his son's neighborhood. He didn't park in front of the house. Instead, he chose a spot under a dark street lamp, just far enough to watch. Through the big front window, he saw Melissa placing cookies on a tray, her movements graceful, deliberate. The children ran circles around the tree, giggling, their faces glowing in the Christmas lights. Then Daniel stepped into the room. Gerald leaned forward in his seat. His son's shoulders were tense, his smile forced. Melissa leaned close, whispering something in his ear. Gerald couldn't hear the words, but he saw the effect. Daniel's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, like a man who had no choice. Gerald's stomach dropped. He knew that look. It wasn't joy. It wasn't peace. It was control. The following night, Gerald couldn't sleep. He tossed in bed, Patricia's old photo staring down at him from the nightstand. At midnight, he gave up. He pulled on his coat, grabbed his keys, and found himself back in Daniel's neighborhood. Snow crunched under his boots as he crept closer to the house. He told himself he wasn't trespassing, just listening. A father desperate to understand why his son was acting like a stranger. Near the side of the house, a basement window glowed faintly. Voices carried up through the glass. Gerald crouched low, his breath hanging in the icy air. Melissa's voice came first, sharp, impatient. "You need to decide, Daniel. We can't keep pretending. If he keeps coming around, he'll find out sooner or later." Gerald's heart hammered in his chest. Daniel's voice followed, weary, broken. "He is my dad, Mel. Cutting him out completely feels wrong." There was silence. Then Melissa again, her tone colder than the wind biting Gerald's face. "Wrong is letting him control you. This house, this family, it's ours now, not his. You know what's at stake with the bank. He can't find out." Gerald's knees nearly gave out. The bank, the mortgage, the letter he found in the trash. This wasn't just about family tension. It was a secret, a dangerous secret. As Gerald crouched there in the snow, he realized something painful. Daniel's rejection hadn't been a personal choice. It was manipulation. It was strategy. Melissa wasn't just steering his son, she was cutting Gerald out deliberately and using Daniel's weakness to do it. Gerald pressed closer, praying to hear more. His heart pounded as Melissa delivered the final blow. "We cut him out for good, starting with Christmas." Gerald stumbled back, the snow crunching beneath his boots. His chest burned with a mix of sorrow and rage. This wasn't just a family drift. This was war. And Melissa had just fired the first shot. By December 21st, Gerald knew he couldn't carry this weight alone. The letter had been sitting on his kitchen table for 2 nights, the bold words "final notice" staring back at him every time he passed. He needed answers, not guesses, not suspicions, answers. So he called an old friend, Harold Jenkins, a man Gerald trusted because they'd shared sweat and grit in the factory years ago, before Harold went into banking. If anyone could explain what that letter truly meant, it was Harold. "Jerry Whitaker," Harold said warmly as they sat down in a quiet cafe in downtown Chicago. "Haven't seen you in years. What brings you out here?" Gerald slid the crumpled envelope across the table. "I need to know what happens if this isn't handled." Harold put on his reading glasses, scanned the letter, and his grin faded fast. "Jerry, this isn't just a late bill. This is a delinquency notice. Your son's already months behind. If he doesn't act, the bank will move to foreclose. We're talking weeks here, maybe sooner." Gerald's throat tightened. He knew things were bad, but foreclosure? That meant losing the house, losing everything. Harold looked up, his eyes sharp. "Jerry, tell me you're not tied to this in any way." Gerald hesitated, his silence heavier than any words. Finally, Gerald whispered, "When Danny bought the house, his credit wasn't strong enough. He begged me to help, said it was just a formality. So I co-signed." Harold leaned back, stunned. "Jerry, that means if he defaults, the bank doesn't just come after him, they come after you too. You're just as responsible." The words hit like a blow to the gut. Gerald wasn't just watching his son's house crumble, his own future was chained to that same sinking stone. Gerald rubbed his temples, his voice cracking. I thought I was helping him. Instead, I chained myself to his debt. The memory of Patricia's smile flashed in his mind. He had wanted their son to have a stable life, a roof over his head, a home for the grandkids. Now that choice threatened to drag him into ruin. Have you ever tried to help someone you love only to realize your sacrifice was being used against you? That's the nightmare Gerald was facing. And if you want to see how he turns this heartbreak into something shocking, stay with me, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with a friend, because the story is about to take a turn no father ever dreams of. Harold leaned in, lowering his voice. Jerry, listen carefully. As co-signer, you actually have rights Daniel doesn't. You can move first. You can call the bank. Separate yourself from this. But if you wait, if he drags this out, you'll both drown together. Gerald stared at him, stunned. Power. For the first time in weeks, the balance of control tilted ever so slightly back into his hands. But the thought cut deep. Would he really use that power against his only son? Could he watch Daniel suffer, watch the grandkids lose their home, just to protect himself? Gerald whispered under his breath, "If I step in, it saves me, but it destroys him." The cafe around them buzzed with holiday chatter, people laughing, clinking mugs of cocoa, exchanging gifts. But at that little table in the corner, Gerald was frozen between two impossible choices. On one side was loyalty to the boy he raised through grief, through poverty, through every storm. On the other side was survival, protecting himself from a debt he never asked for, from a woman who had turned his son against him. It wasn't just Christmas at stake anymore. It was blood. It was legacy. It was betrayal versus protection. What would you have done in Gerald's shoes? Would you protect your son even if it meant sinking with him, or would you cut the rope before he drags you down? Tell me in the comments, because Gerald's decision will shake this family to the core. As Gerald left the cafe, snow whipping against his face, Harold's words echoed in his ears. You can act before Daniel does. Gerald gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. For the first time, he saw the rejection from Christmas for what it really was. Not just emotional, but financial. They didn't cut him out because he was complicated. They cut him out because they needed him blind. And Gerald whispered to himself, with a steel he hadn't felt in years, if they want me gone, then they're going to regret it. The next day, Gerald's phone rang. It was Harold again. His voice was tense, lower than usual. Jerry, I couldn't sleep last night. That notice kept eating at me, so I made a few calls. I still have friends at First National. I pulled the file on Daniel's mortgage, and, Jerry, you're not going to like this. Gerald's chest tightened. Tell me. Harold exhaled. Your son hasn't just missed a couple of payments. There's more. Refinancing attempts, cash advances. And here's the kicker. Most of it is tied to Melissa's name. Gerald froze. Melissa? You mean she's been pulling equity from the house, Harold said firmly, quietly, thousands of dollars at a time, little by little, draining it dry. Your son might not even know the full extent. The words slammed into Gerald harder than any factory accident he had ever survived. Melissa wasn't just pushing him away emotionally. She was digging a financial pit and dragging Daniel and Gerald down into it. Gerald's hands shook as he pressed the phone tighter to his ear. You're saying she's been bleeding the house dry behind my son's back? That's exactly what I'm saying. Harold's voice was grave. If foreclosure hits, you're both ruined. But Jerry, you need to understand something. As co-signer, you're not powerless here. You actually have the authority to act before they do. One call from you could sever your liability. The house would fall squarely on them. Gerald slumped into his recliner, his eyes drifting to Patricia's photo on the mantel. He whispered under his breath, "All my sacrifices turned into weapons against me." The double shifts, the broken bones, the Christmases he nearly worked through just to keep food on the table. All of it had been for Daniel, and now Melissa had twisted those sacrifices into shackles. If you've ever felt that kind of betrayal, drop a comment below, because Gerald's next move will show just how far a father can go when he's pushed too far. That night, Gerald couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the pieces in his mind. Daniel's clipped voice on the phone, Melissa's cold whispers through the basement window, and now this. Melissa wasn't just influencing Daniel emotionally. She was steering him financially, too. Every decision, every lie, every secret was tangled in her grip. How deep did her control run? How much of Daniel was still his son, and how much had Melissa already taken from him? By midnight, Gerald stood at his window, staring out at the snow piling higher against the curb. His breath fogged the glass as he whispered a single sentence to himself. "Tomorrow morning, I make the call." The question was, what call? Would it be the call that saved him and doomed his son? Or the call that tried to pull Daniel out of Melissa's shadow, no matter the cost? The answer wasn't clear yet, but Gerald's mind had shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't the man waiting to be included. He was the one holding the power. Gerald's about to make a choice that no parent should ever face: protect himself and destroy his son's home, or risk losing everything to stay loyal. What would you do in his place? While you think about that, don't forget to like this video, because the next chapter will show you how one phone call can shatter an entire family. The house was silent as Gerald set the mortgage notice back on the table. He turned off the light, his decision burning in his chest like a coal. Christmas morning was coming, and with it, a phone call that would change everything. Christmas morning dawned quiet in Naperville. Snowflakes drifted gently from the sky, covering every rooftop in a thick, white silence. It was the kind of morning families woke up to laughter, the smell of cinnamon rolls, kids tearing through stockings. But Gerald's house was still, silent. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at a single ornament hanging on his modest little tree. It was Daniel's ornament from 3rd grade, hand-painted with yellow that had long since faded. The star was crooked, clumsy, but precious. Gerald reached out, brushing it with his fingertips. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You made this with your own hands, Danny. How did we get here?" Beside the tree was Patricia's photo, smiling softly in a frame worn with age. For a moment, Gerald could almost hear her voice telling him not to be rash, not to let anger guide his choices. But then, another voice cut through his memory. Melissa's, sharp and cold. "We cut him out for good." Gerald sat frozen between two ghosts, Patricia's kindness, Melissa's cruelty. His heart tugged in two directions. One part whispered forgiveness, the other screamed revenge. He poured himself a black coffee, the steam rising into the still air. His hand hovered over the phone. For long minutes he stared at it, his pulse loud in his ears. Would he? Or wouldn't he? If you were in Gerald's shoes right now, staring at that phone, would you pick it up? Would you protect yourself and risk destroying your son? Or would you stay silent and hope love somehow fixes the damage? Let me know in the comments, because Gerald's next move will change his family forever. Finally, Gerald inhaled deeply and dialed. A crisp voice answered on the second ring. "First National Bank Mortgage Services. This is Miss Langley. How may I help you?" Gerald's voice was steady, colder than he expected. "This is Gerald Whitaker. I'm a co-signer on the Whitaker mortgage, account ending 3271. I want to discuss my rights as guarantor." There was silence as keys clattered on the other end. "Yes, Mr. Whitaker, I see the account. It is significantly delinquent."
"I'm aware," Gerald said. His jaw tightened. "I want to terminate my cosigner obligation effective immediately. I will not assume liability for further delinquency." The line went quiet, then transferred. A deeper voice came on. "Mr. Whitaker, this is Mr. Harris, mortgage supervisor. I understand you want to withdraw as guarantor?" "Yes," Gerald said firmly. "Effective today." "Very well. We'll need your signature, but I can initiate proceedings now. This will transfer full liability to the primary borrower." Gerald swallowed hard. "Do it." With those 3 words, everything changed. The mountain of debt, the threat of foreclosure, the crushing weight. All of it slid off Gerald's shoulders and landed squarely on Daniel and Melissa. Gerald hung up the phone. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from something stranger. Relief. He leaned back in his chair, staring at Patricia's photo. "Would you hate me for this? Or would you say I finally stood up for myself?" For the first time in weeks, Gerald felt calm. Not happy, not triumphant, just calm. And yet guilt gnawed at the edges of that calm. He had just made a move that could rip his son's life apart. Do you think Gerald went too far? Or was this the only way to make his son finally wake up? Drop your thoughts below, because the fallout of this one call will leave you speechless. Just as Gerald lifted the mug of coffee to his lips, there was a knock at the door, sharp, urgent. His heart jumped. He wasn't expecting anyone. He rose slowly, each step heavy with dread. When he opened the door, there stood Daniel, his hair mussed, his coat half-buttoned, his face pale as the snow. Behind him, Melissa sat in the car, her eyes narrow, lips pressed into a tight, furious line. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice shaking, "what did you do?" Gerald's throat tightened. He didn't answer. Because in that moment, he knew the war he had just started was only beginning. Daniel pushed past his father the second the door opened, his boots leaving streaks of snow on the rug. His hands raked through his hair, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild with panic. "Why would you do this to me?" Daniel shouted, his voice echoing through the quiet house. "The bank called, Dad. They said you pulled out, that you dumped everything on me. Why?" Gerald closed the door slowly, his face calm, almost too calm. He had been waiting for this moment. "Why?" Gerald said evenly. "Let me ask you something first. Why did you uninvite me from Christmas?" Daniel froze. His chest rose and fell as if he'd been hit. "Dad, No," Gerald cut him off, his voice firm. "You looked me in the eye over the phone and told me not to come. You knew what that would do to me. After 67 years, after everything I've given, you shut me out. Why?" Daniel's mouth opened, but the words wouldn't come. For a moment, he looked like the boy Gerald remembered, lost, ashamed, unable to meet his father's eyes. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Melissa said it was best." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "Melissa?" Daniel nodded, his voice cracking. She thought you'd make things more complicated, that the kids didn't need the stress. She convinced me it was the right thing." Gerald stepped closer, his jaw tight. "So you chose her over me?"
Daniel's shoulders slumped. "She's my wife, Dad. I had to listen. You don't understand what it's like." Have you ever had to watch someone you love choose another person's voice over yours? That's the pain Gerald felt in that moment. If you've ever been caught in that kind of family conflict, let me know in the comments, because this showdown is about to hit harder. Daniel's lips trembled. His eyes glistened as he whispered, "Dad, I didn't want it to be like this." But Gerald shook his head, his voice low and steady. "You made your choice, Danny. Now you live with it." The words landed heavier than any punch. Daniel looked at his father like he didn't recognize him anymore. From the driveway came a sharp honk. Gerald looked through the window. Melissa sat behind the wheel, her hands gripping it tight, her eyes locked on the house like a hawk waiting to strike. "Melissa's waiting," Gerald said flatly. "You'd better go." Daniel swallowed hard, turned without another word, and walked to the door. His boots thudded against the floor, each step heavier than the last. As the door opened, the cold air rushed in. Gerald caught one last look. Melissa's face illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. Her lips were pressed into a thin, furious line. Her eyes didn't just glare, they promised. Promised payback. Gerald's stomach twisted. He knew this wasn't over. Melissa isn't the type to back down quietly. You can see it in her eyes. She's planning her next move. What do you think she'll do next? Stick around, because the war for this family isn't over yet. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Gerald sank into his recliner, his body heavy, his chest tight. The Christmas tree glowed faintly in the corner, its crooked star barely holding on. The ornament Daniel had painted as a boy swung gently, as if mocking him with memories of better days. The phone call was made. The confrontation was done. His revenge was sealed. But now that the silence had returned, Gerald felt the question echo in his own chest. Had he gone too far? His eyes drifted to Patricia's photo on the mantel. Her soft smile, frozen in time, was a reminder of the promises he once made to her. Promises whispered to her casket all those years ago. "I'll take care of our boy, no matter what." And now, his boy was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. Stripped away by choices, by manipulation, by Melissa's shadow. Gerald's throat tightened. "Patty, I don't know if I protected him or destroyed him." Every parent gives. Every parent sacrifices. Sleep, comfort, their own dreams. And deep down, every parent hopes that someday those sacrifices will be honored, that loyalty will be repaid with love. But Gerald sat alone on Christmas morning, proof that sometimes, no matter what you give, you still end up shut out. Gerald sipped the cold coffee on the table. He thought about Melissa's glare from the car, the way her eyes promised retaliation. "She won't stop," Gerald muttered under his breath. "Not until she destroys what's left of Daniel's bond with me." The battle lines were clear now. This wasn't just between father and son anymore. This was between Gerald and Melissa, and only one of them would walk away holding Daniel's loyalty. For a fleeting moment, Gerald felt satisfaction. He had taken control. He had flipped the script. For once, he wasn't the victim. But that satisfaction came with sorrow. Sorrow for the boy he had raised, the boy who once looked at him with Christmas joy in his eyes, the boy who now saw him as the man who wrecked his home. Was Gerald right to do it? To cut the rope before he was dragged into ruin? Or had he become just as cruel as Melissa, wielding power without mercy? The line between love and revenge had blurred, and Gerald, sitting in that dim living room, wasn't sure which side of it he was standing on anymore.
The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Gerald sank into his recliner, his body heavy, his chest tight. The Christmas tree glowed faintly in the corner, its crooked star barely holding on. The ornament Daniel had painted as a boy swung gently, as if mocking him with memories of better days. The phone call was made, the confrontation was done. His revenge was sealed. But now that the silence had returned, Gerald felt the question echo in his own chest. Had he gone too far? His eyes drifted to Patricia's photo on the mantel. Her soft smile, frozen in time, was a reminder of the promises he once made, promises whispered to her casket all those years ago. "I'll take care of our boy, no matter what." And now, his boy was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. Stripped away by choices, by manipulation, by Melissa's shadow. Gerald's throat tightened. "Patty," he whispered, "I don't know if I protected him or destroyed him. Every parent gives. Every parent sacrifices. Sleep, comfort, their own dreams. And deep down, every parent hopes that someday those sacrifices will be honored, that loyalty will be repaid with love." But Gerald sat alone on Christmas morning. Proof that sometimes, no matter what you give, you still end up shut out. Gerald sipped the cold coffee on the table. He thought about Melissa's glare from the car, the way her eyes promised retaliation. "She won't stop," Gerald muttered under his breath. "Not until she destroys what's left of Daniel's bond with me." The battle lines were clear now. This wasn't just between father and son anymore. This was between Gerald and Melissa, and only one of them would walk away holding Daniel's loyalty. For a fleeting moment, Gerald felt satisfaction. He had taken control. He had flipped the script. For once, he wasn't the victim. But that satisfaction came with sorrow. Sorrow for the boy he had raised. The boy who once looked at him with Christmas joy in his eyes. The boy who now saw him as the man who wrecked his home. Was Gerald right to do it? To cut the rope before he was dragged into ruin? Or had he become just as cruel as Melissa, wielding power without mercy? The line between love and revenge had blurred, and Gerald, sitting in that dim living room, wasn't sure which side of it he was standing on anymore. Do you think Gerald was right, or did he cross the line? Was this justice, or just another act of cruelty? I want to hear your thoughts, because your take might be the one that finally settles this debate. Gerald leaned back, closing his eyes, but his mind refused to rest. Melissa still had cards left to play. There were secrets buried in those bank statements, manipulations he hadn't uncovered yet. And deep down, Gerald knew the war wasn't over. The mortgage was just the beginning. He raised his glass, toasting the empty room. "Merry Christmas, Patricia. I gave them something they'll never forget." The snow outside fell heavier, blanketing the world in silence. And with that silence came one final question. What would you have done in Gerald's place? Would you forgive your son, or finish what you started? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, stories about betrayal, loyalty, and the price of revenge, make sure you subscribe, because the next tale might be even closer to your own life than you think. Thank you for watching.